What's up, my friend? Here, we're doing AP World History tonight. I'm super stoked because the Cold War is like one of my favorite topics. I really like talking about it. I don't know. I just think it's super interesting. So before we jump in, I've got all kinds of stuff for you tonight. And we have, we're going to practice some trivia games with our app tonight. So woohoo, you get to play the app. But before we do that, in the chat, tell me how you're doing. How are you feeling? On a scale of, AP scale, 1 to 5, are you feeling like, shoot, the AP World Test is in like, I don't know, like 40 something days? I'm freaking out. Or are you feeling like, I got this? Let's see how you feel. Keep forgetting info. Yeah, this isn't April Fool's. This is like straight up, y'all, like this test is coming up. It's so soon. Like I feel like all year I've been like, don't worry, you've got time. But now like, I know the freak out begins, and in a lot of ways it is warranted, right? It's coming up quick. I'm not playing with you. It's not going to be an easy test. So that's why we have Fiveable. That's why we're here. We're going to help you guys. So I know that the stress levels are going up, but I'm going to try to get you guys to breathe a little bit, calm down a little bit, study a little bit, so that on May 16th, you're going to walk into that exam not freaking out. You're going to feel like, I got this. I'm so ready. Give me the test. Let's go. Let's do this. Let's get this college credit. It's so worth it. I'm telling you, I'm just on the other side of college debt. I'm telling you, I can't tell you how many times I think about how much I wish I took more AP classes. I just didn't. I didn't think about it, or just didn't think, I was like, I'll worry about it later. Don't worry about it later. It sucks. So with that said, yeah, you guys are all freaking out. Okay, so if you are new to Fiveable, haven't watched a stream before, super quick, let me just show you guys around. You are on the AP World Watch page right now. There's links to other things that you might need. In the chat that you see, that chat is for you guys. I'm going to be like presenting, so sometimes I won't see the chat. If you need to ask me something, that's what the ask a question like parking lot is for. So put any questions that you have in the parking lot, and I will go through and answer them. I'll kind of answer throughout, and I'll definitely answer at the end. So recap, chat all you want in the chat, ask me questions in the ask a question. It's also super helpful for me, if you guys help each other, right? So if someone has a question and you think you can answer it, go for it, do it. Help each other out, right? So, like I said, my goals today, I'm going to help you guys get a sense of the Cold War. You can take an entire college class on just the Cold War. So this is a really condensed look. This is an AP look. But I'm going to show you what you need to know. We haven't really seen a ton of essay questions on the Cold War, so I would think of this as a possible topic, right? Like if I organize all the topics that have ever been asked before, I want to look for the ones that haven't, to kind of get a sense of like what might they ask me about. This is not an exact science. This is a totally like guesstimate science, but that's how I would approach it. So, all right, so I'm going to share my slides, and while I do that, if you could pop in the chat, what are you studying right now in AP World? Don't tell me the chapter. I don't have the chapters memorized. Tell me the content, like what topics are you studying right now? All right, and I'm just gonna, whoop. I'm gonna share this guy. All right, that should be sharing any second. Okay, there we go. All right, so can you guys see my screen? No. Yeah, that's super weird. Okay, hang on. All right, that's weird. All right, let's try it one more time. Okay, so it looks like you guys are at Chinese Revolution, finishing up Unit 5, about to start World War II. Okay, so some of you guys are on Cold War. it looks like everyone's kind of, this is the point of the year where, you know, the stress levels go up, not just for you, but for teachers too, right? There's a lot to cover and there's so much stuff to like explain. And so when you really, you know, narrow it down, it's really difficult. Okay, I'm gonna leave that there for now. Okay, so listen, at the end of tonight, I'm gonna share with you guys our mobile apps so that you can play the trivia game tonight at the end of the session. Okay, now you can see the screen. Yes, excellent. Okay, so let's talk about the Cold War. Let's jump in. And then at the end of tonight, I'm gonna be giving you, we're gonna play this, play the trivia app. I just put the link there for myself. Follow us on social media. We have tons of good videos for you, especially on YouTube for AP World. That's my thing, that's my jam. So I've got lots of videos for you there. And we're posting all kinds of things on Twitter and Instagram leading up to the exam because we're a bunch of nerds and we love studying and we wanna help you do better. Also, Fiveable Plus is rolling. We've got replays from 250 plus live streams, all up, all the subjects are up there, hundreds of trivia questions that we're uploading every day, all the slides, including these slides, resources, stream notes, and then I'll be live every night of the exam week to support only Fiveable Plus members. So remember, these live streams are free up until that week. And at the end of tonight, I'm gonna throw you guys a $10 off code to help you out. All right. So we're in period 6. Period 6 has 3 key concepts. We've talked about, last week, Mr. Lassiter talked about key concept 6.1, that's science and technology. Global conflict is 6.2. This topic, the Cold War, kind of talks about all 3, but it would mostly fit into like conflict, right? All right, so let's just get into it. So remember, post the questions that you have in the Ask a Question, and I'll stop throughout, okay? So what is a Cold War? Like, what am I talking about when I say Cold War? So let's first like do some definitions. So there are Cold Wars, there are hot wars. And it's really exactly what it sounds like. Cold Wars are only fought through diplomacy. So, you know, making different kinds of treaties, getting really, really, really close to fighting each other, but not actually firing any weapons at each other directly. You might fight through proxies, right? So like I'll talk about later, you know, like Vietnam is a proxy war. It's the US backing South Vietnam and the Soviet Union and China backing North Vietnam, but you don't get, you know, Americans shooting directly at Russians or at the Chinese. That would be a hot war. Right, so a hot war is like fought through direct attacks. This would be like World War I, World War II, the Civil War. In terms of Cold Wars, you know, basically it's just any time you have 2 countries that are like at odds with each other, but aren't actually firing at each other. So 1945 to 1989 is like the Cold War. And this is what we're gonna talk about throughout the entire thing. So let me get a sense of your questions just to see where we're at. Lasting effects of Stalin, how is Bay of Pigs connected? Great questions. Didn't the US start the Cold War? Good questions. Any tips on cramming for several AP exams? Well, I'll get to that one later. All right, so let's click this one. Didn't the US start the Cold War? And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how the Cold War began, the causes of the Cold War. Okay, so basically, this is a kind of complicated causation, right? Because it's not like there's one like trigger and then it begins. It's a really complex conflict. So the events leading up to it are complicated, and then the events at the end are really complicated. But you can basically narrow it down to 4 major causes, of which the US is a part of because they're a part of this conflict. But you essentially have ideological differences, right? This communism versus capitalism. They're completely at odds with each other because they're different ways of structuring an economy, and they don't help each other out, right? So there isn't really a respect between them. At the same time, you have new technologies. right? So at the end of World War II, remember that the United States dropped nuclear bombs on Japan. They didn't share any of that information with the Soviet Union. And so because of that, now you have the Soviet Union is going to rush to catch up. They get atomic weapons fairly quickly after the US, and now you have this battle, right? So now, part of the reason why this is a Cold War is because of these technologies, because the technologies were so severe that you can't fight at each other. If I throw a nuke at Russia and Russia throws a nuke at me, like, we've now ruined the entire world. So, cause of the Cold War, we can't fight each other like we used to because our weapons are too dangerous now. A couple of other causes would be just like vacuums of power at the end of World War II. So, the Nazis had expanded dramatically in Europe. The Japanese had expanded dramatically in Asia. And once both of them fall, now there's just like places that are, basically like this power vacuum is just pulled away from them, right? Especially Eastern Europe, especially Southeast Asia. And so after that, you get this like rush, right? This battle to like conquer those lands first, right? So, the United States wants to make sure that they're influential in those areas. The Soviet Union wants to make sure that they're influential. So there's a quick rush to like gather up, places. And then finally, the world wars, right? So Russia and the United States were both involved in the world wars, and there was a lot of bad taste in for both of them because of decisions that had been made, right? Russia had exited World War I because of the Bolshevik Revolution. Russia had also lost a lot of people, a lot more people, like millions more people than anybody else in World War II. And so they were, obviously upset about the war and wanted to make sure that they benefited from things after. And then, of course, the war in the Pacific. The Soviets did not right away get involved. They don't jump in to help the Allies with Japan until way, way later. And so because of that, they are, the Americans are pretty frustrated by the lack of like support from the Russians. And then also like when the Americans get involved in World War II, they don't go straight to help the Soviets, they go to help the British. And so there's just like, everyone's just super salty after the war, right? It's obviously like a mess. A lot of people die because of this. And so nobody's happy. And this is what leads to the Cold War. All right, let me stop answering this question. All right, and we will go back. Oh, okay, this question here. What are IBMs? IBMs are intercontinental ballistic missiles. So it's basically that you can shoot one missile from one continent and reach another and then get to your exact location, right? So just like better technologies, being able to do that is pretty insane, right? All right, done answering that one. Okay. All right, so let me go back in. Okay. All right, so let's go back. So a lot of the Cold War is just kind of like a series of events, right? So right after World War II, Europe is completely destroyed, like completely destroyed, especially the cities, right? Berlin, London, so many cities in Poland and France, things are just destroyed. And so if you remember, after World War I, the reaction, the way that the Treaty of Versailles dealt with that destruction was to put all of the blame on Germany and make them pay for it. That didn't work, right? So that led to a lot of resentment, which led to World War II. And so this time, they're going to learn from their mistakes. And so instead of penalizing one person and making one person pay for this, a plan is developed to actually like infuse a lot of these countries with money, right? To rebuild their economy, to help them rebuild their cities and to help people still live there. Otherwise, you're going to have a massive refugee crisis, worse than you would have had already. And so this is what the Marshall Plan looks like. So the United States gets, because the Allies literally liberate the West and the Soviets literally liberate the East. Once the Nazis fall, the United States then takes a big part in supporting Western Europe. And so they infuse something like $150 billion in today's money into Western Europe to help them rebuild. And so this is kind of what the breakdown looked like of just like where the money went. And you notice like one of the big things here is that the countries that were the belligerents, right? Germany is still getting a huge chunk of this. Obviously the United Kingdom, they're the ally, but West Germany, that was your enemy. But instead of just making them pay, they're helping them to rebuild. Italy, right? Italy was under Mussolini. Italy was part of who they were fighting. But again, instead of making them pay for it, they're helping them to rebuild. And so this is actually seen as like one of the most like successful post-war plans, policies, because we don't have a all right, hold on. You guys are asking for, all right, I'm going to post the slides in this one, because I think this is a good one. And generally, though, this is a Fiveable Plus thing, but I actually haven't posted this in the Fiveable Plus area quite yet. So I'm just going to share this with you for now so that you've got it. And then I'll jump back in. Yay, Amanda's giving us some free slides. Woo woo! Presenter view. Okay, here we go. Boop, boop, boop. All right, here's the deal. I'm going to give you these slides, but next week you have to not only come to the live stream, you got to bring a friend. How's that? Slides. You got to bring a friend. I'm telling you, man. I'm going to know if you didn't. Yeah, bring your friends. Okay, so AP is our only friend. That's just okay. So anyway, all right, so going into the aftermath. Okay, so Germany itself. So we know that they give them, West Germany is like the allies, right? So Great Britain, France, and the US. East Germany is the Soviets. And so this is kind of the first, so even though there had been like conflicts between the Soviets and the Allies before the end of the war, not battle, but the conflicts over Germany are really the first events of the Cold War. This is the beginning, okay? So here's how this breaks down. You have Germany split into 4 sectors, okay? Where Great Britain, France, United States, and the Soviet Union each get a sector split into 4. And Berlin, which is right in the middle here, is also split into 4. So you can see how there's like 4 little sectors here. Okay, so, but then these 3 are aligned with each other. And so they decide, instead of each having our own sector, let's combine them and just create West Germany. So this whole thing becomes West Germany, and this becomes East Germany. The problem is that Berlin is like a complete island within East Germany. So instead of just being like, cool, no problem, the Soviets want all of Berlin. And so what they do is they create a blockade around the entire Allied sector, right? So they literally like block them off, so they can't get any supplies. And their hope is that the Allies will just say, all right, whatever, just take Berlin, okay? But that doesn't happen. Instead of just doing that, Truman starts to send airplanes that are dropping supplies in. And this happens for like a year. And so eventually they back off, and eventually you have East Berlin and West Berlin. This is like the first real like crisis that sort of ensues after the war, where the Allies are just kind of like, can't we just have West Berlin, just leave it alone? And the Soviets are like, no, we want more land, right? We want that area. So this is like one of the first things that comes up. Germany was split after which war? World War II. So you can see the slides if you're click the button that says slides. Should be there. Okay, so Germany split after the war. This map just shows the 4 sectors, but then imagine that the green, the blue, and the yellow will combine to create West Germany, and it stays split until 1990. Okay, so for a long time, it's split into 2 countries. They play separately in the Olympics. They were completely separate countries in all aspects. Okay, so with this new divide, okay, so after World War II, you start to see just like the entire world dividing up into two sides, right? And it's really actually 3 sides, and we're going to talk about the 3rd side after this. But the way that you're seeing these 2 alignments are through official alliances and even like colonies and whatnot. All right, so you've got NATO, right, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? So this would be like the political organization that supports, you know, like the West, right, the Allies. And then you have the Warsaw Pact, which is the opposite, right? This is the Soviet answer to that. So all the blue are either, you know, directly aligned with the United States through NATO or other allies of the US in some capacity. All of the red are either aligned with the Soviet Union through the Warsaw Pact or aligned with the Soviet Union in some other way. Anything that's gray is non-aligned, so they are not part of the 2 camps. Okay, so when you think about the Cold War, it's important to remember that it's not, even though it's the US versus, you know, the Soviet Union, the whole world is involved, right? And because it's a Cold War, it's really going to affect every other country in a lot of ways, and sometimes more than the 2 countries at odds, because this is where the wars are fought. These are where, you know, these are the people that have to sort of deal with it. All right. Moving on. So we talked about this like 3rd way, right? So there are like 2 camps, obviously, this like blue and red, but there are also all, you know, you can see here, all the countries that are grayed out, they are, you know, choosing not to be a part of this. Obviously, like China will become red, but they're also like not really choosing sides with things. So the big thing is this map is a map of the Bandung Conference. So this happens in 1955. This is literally a conference of the non-aligned countries. The big players include these guys. This is Nehru from India. This is Nkrumah from Ghana, Nasser from Egypt, and Sukarno from India, and then Tito from Yugoslavia. So they are part of this like non-aligned movement, this 3rd way. They represent countries that were at this time or had been before colonized by other countries or occupied by other countries, right? So Yugoslavia had been occupied by the Soviet Union, Indonesia, what was that, the Dutch? You know, Egypt, the British, Ghana, the British, I believe, maybe the French. And then India, of course, the British. And so, you know, they are, when you think about why they would want to represent a 3rd way, they're not benefiting from capitalism. In fact, they are harmed by capitalism. They're not benefiting from communism. In fact, they're harmed by communism. And so in this case, it's like, okay, well, I don't want to choose either one of these teams because they have either occupied, you know, my country and then left us for what, right? So by 1955, most of these countries had become independent or were on their way to becoming independent. But you have now decades of colonization, right? And this is just just constant. So this question of like, how are they harmed by communism? It's the same way, right? So it's like the communist countries, like for example, Tito, you have communist countries like the Soviet Union occupying Yugoslavia, limiting their economic growth, limiting their their like media, what they can say, limiting their like political conversations, just in every little aspect, right? It's the same thing with capitalism. When you have a colonizer coming in, all these countries are being limited by their actual like growth in terms of who's occupying them. And so I think for them, the movement to have this other option was like, you know, I don't want to choose a side when I'm not represented on that side. And so this is kind of a fascinating movement. And I could totally see in AP world that, you know, a lot of the Cold War is very obviously Eurocentric or American centric. And so because of that, I could totally see like this being a predominant part of a Cold War type question, because this is the rest of the world, right? This is everybody else. And actually there was a practice DBQ. I'm not sure if it was like released totally, but it was about decolonization in these countries. And there's a picture of them. And like one of the fascinating things too is just like how they're dressed, right? It's still like their traditional dress and not all of them, right? So you have 3 guys in suits, but 2 of them are wearing more traditional clothing, and that just kind of part of the same story, right? Okay, so moving over to communism in China, and then we'll go back to sort of the like Soviet Union versus America stuff. So in 1949, Mao comes to power. I love this meme, by the way. This is just so funny. Mao comes to power. The communists defeat the nationalists. Keep in mind that in China, they were in a civil war for like 40 years or more, right? It's a long time that's just sort of put on pause because of the world wars. So the war finishes at the end of World War II, and the communists win. Okay, so Mao comes to power. As he comes to power, this is like a massive shift in Cold War policy, because now the American side is nervous. Okay, China is a huge country. If China just fell to communism, what's next, right? So this is just like a massive, like everyone's freaking out, right? And like this is huge. Is the transition from a dynasty to, so no, the transition had been to the like nationalist power in 1912. That was when the Qing dynasty, which was the last dynasty. Y'all should remember. Okay, so Qing, yes, got it right, right? So, okay, so 2 things to remember about Mao of like, you know, major things that happened in China under communism. One would be the Great Leap Forward. This is in 1958. This is sort of Mao's version of the 5-year plan, right? So this is the plan to restructure the economy to go from predominantly agrarian to more industrial. And essentially what he does though is he starts to adopt a lot of the like Soviet agricultural techniques, which were not great, and essentially like forces the country to be a part of this, moves a lot of people onto communes, gets them to be farming a lot, but like through industrial mechanisms, and then moves the rest of the people over to like industrial jobs. And so the problem was that the techniques used in agriculture here were not good science. And so it led to like a lot of people dying because of famine. At the same time, there were also massive floods and a drought that just like didn't help. And so this is like a massive failure. It's 20 to 50 million people that die because of the Great Leap Forward, meant to be a 5-year plan, only lasts for 2. And then Mao is a bit shunned because of it. And so the Cultural Revolution in 1966, this goes from 66 to when Mao dies. And this is just like preserving Chinese communism and really everyone else is purged. And so this could mean if you represented any sort of old tradition in China, if you represented anything against communism, against the Chinese way of communism, then you could be killed, right? Or you were killed, and then you and your family. And so, right, so you get a lot of, immigration from China during this time, right? It was not a safe place if you fall into any of those camps. And so these are like the two major events to know when you're talking about communism in China. Red Scarf Girl is an interesting read. Yeah, totally. There's also a movie, I can't remember right now. There's like a movie that does a really good job of showing the Cultural Revolution. Oh man, I watched it years ago. If you have any other ideas, suggestions of like movies and stuff about Cold War, drop them in the chat. This is a great topic to like watch things about. Okay, so once China falls, then Korea falls, right? Kind of falls. And I'm putting falls in like quotes because it's subjective, right? Like I'm obviously living in the United States, so I'm telling this whole story from an American perspective. So I'm saying they fell. So once, I wish that little thing would go away. Okay, so Korea is like the first proxy war. So China falls, and then in 1950, just 1 year later, then you get this Korean conflict, right? So, North Korea would be aligned with communist nations. South Korea would be aligned with capitalist nations. And so all of a sudden you get this like, okay, now we got to trigger the UN. This is the first time, NATO, everyone's coming in to try to support this. And the entire 3-year war it's like nothing changes. They come in exactly where the divide had happened. They push back a few different ways over 3 years, and then they end up right back where it all began at the 38th parallel, which is exactly where things are divided today. And so Korea, not all of it falls, but half of it does. And so now there's like more panic, right? Okay, well, you can literally see on a map, it's Russia, and then it's China, and then it's Korea. Well, how far is this going to go? And so this whole idea of the domino theory really completely dictates like 1960s foreign policy with the United States, policy in Soviet Union, concern about the rest of Asia falling too. And so the idea is if we can prevent Vietnam from becoming communist, then Laos and Cambodia and Thailand and Burma here, which is Myanmar now, all of these other countries could stand tall, right? So in this image, you have the Viet Cong character. This would be the the communist like guerrillas from Vietnam. Here's your American soldier, and they're like, it's literally dominoes. So let's see. So, I mean, if you really if we're categorizing the whole Cold War, you think of like the 40s as sort of setting the stage. Everyone's sort of dividing up into their different teams. And you have these first few conflicts that are a bit more, concerning, right? Like we're not fighting each other, of course, but we're arguing. In the 50s and 60s, this is where you have more of this domino theory and this containment theory. So one of the things I didn't bring up was containment. So let me just go back to this map really quick. So the whole idea of containment is to literally contain the spread of communism, right? So the domino effect is like what happens if you don't contain it. But containment is like, okay, well, there's a line here. Let's make sure it doesn't cross that, right? There's a line here. Let's make sure it doesn't cross that. Let's literally like contain it. So the 50s and 60s are all about containing communism and preventing other countries from falling. And that's sort of like a by all means necessary type of deal, right? So the US is going to get involved in these massive conflicts with sending troops, sending a lot of money, getting really heavily involved in these conflicts for the sole purpose of containing communism. All right, so what is the word? Oh yeah. This question here, let me go, I'll answer that after. Okay, so the Viet Cong is, yeah, you got this, Northern Communists. All right, so meanwhile, like super meanwhile, as the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s are happening, you also have this arms race, right? So there's the pressure to contain communism, but there's also a pressure to stay balanced, right? So remember that after World War II, the US gets nuclear weapons first, but the Soviets catch up to them very quickly. And after they're caught up, now you have this like mutually assured destruction, right? If one starts the war, the other one's gonna fight back with equal weapons. And that keeps people at the same playing field, right? You don't want your enemy to have better weapons than you do. You gotta make sure that you limit them and that you're developing very quickly. So in the United States, this military industrial complex, it changes all of United States history, right? So even things you wouldn't think about. Think about like our highways. Our highway system was developed so that tanks could get from one place to another quickly. Like that is the purpose behind it. Why did we went from not having highways to having a whole network of highways across the entire United States. That is driven for the purpose of making it easier for military transport. One. Second, another major way that we changed, the space race. Okay, so in 1957, the Soviet Union sends up Sputnik. That's the first satellite that gets to space and orbits the Earth. Think about how just think about how scary this would have been. You're already worried about a nuclear war, okay? And now your enemy has just sent a rocket into space and it's floating around the Earth. Well, what happens if they put a missile on it? Like, this is terrifying, right? And so because of that, the US is gonna compete, right? So they're gonna get involved in the space race, make sure that they can send a man to the moon, right? And as a result of the space race, in the 1960s, we see some massive changes to education, because the problem is that our youth weren't as up to par with the Soviet youth. And so we need to make sure that math and science is really drilled in school, right? So the way you learn in school and what you learn, so much of that comes from this era, like what we deem to be important, how we then drill those things into students come out of this era. And it's good and bad, right? A lot of more money from like federal money was put into education in this era, which is a good thing, but is also drilled, right? It's also like, it's part of this industrial complex. It's like, all right, let's churn out these scientists so that we can get to the moon faster, so that we can compete. You know, if you are someone like me that likes history, that likes to write, you don't fit into that process as well, right? Think about the arts, right? Think about all the things that don't fit into that. And so it changes how we do it. And then of course you get movements of anti-nuclear weapons, right? Obviously having nuclear weapons is really scary. Someone can press a button and now a whole country doesn't exist. I don't know about you, but like not the way that I want to live, right? Like that's really scary. And so with that, it's like movements to sort of pull away from that, right? Right now we have mutually assured destruction. Well, what if we had like mutually assured like peace? I don't know. Maybe I'm just a dreamer, but what are you gonna do? All right, so a few more things just to kind of like end it out. And I shared the slides with you, so you're gonna be able to see that I added these like timelines at the end. So now that we have nukes, everybody's got them, there's at least one like very, very close call. And this would be the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this is the time where like at school, you know how like now we have fire drills, earthquake drills, you know, shooter drills. You're prepared at school for all types of different disasters. At this time, they would have done the like duck and cover, right? If there's a nuclear bomb dropped on us while we're at school, what do we do? And so they literally would practice getting under their desks as if that would help. Ask your parents, ask your grandparents about that, because that is something that would literally happen. And so here, this Cuban Missile Crisis is pretty much the closest that we ever came to actual nuclear war. And so really summarized, Fidel Castro, Cuba. Cuba is really close to the US. It's like 90 miles away from Florida. On the left, you have Nikita Khrushchev of the Soviet Union. And on the right, you have John F. Kennedy of the United States. Khrushchev and the Soviet Union put some weapons on Cuba, right? So they were buddies. These two are buddies, they're friends. Fidel Castro is more leaning towards communism than capitalism. And so they're friends. He is putting weapons on Cuba, and we find out through spying, right? So we find out through pictures that we've taken of Cuba. And now Kennedy needs to figure out, what are we going to do about it, right? What do we do? How are they going to shoot at us? Do we need to attack before they attack? They're 90 miles away from Florida. How do we diffuse the situation without literally ending the world? And so there's like 2 weeks of just like close call after close call until finally they strike a deal that the US decides we'll take our weapons out of the Ukraine, and as long as you take your weapons out of Cuba. Deal, right? Now we're back to a balance. Super close though. So the Cuban Missile Crisis. What made them think though a wooden desk would do anything? Yeah, I mean, the duck and cover stuff is, look up on YouTube the duck and cover video. It's like, there are tons of like little like PSAs that would like explain to students how to save themselves. You do what you can, right? I mean, I'm sure many of you have been in drills at school that felt like they didn't make much sense, right? Like you're in a bomb drill or a shooter drill or anything like that, that you're in your classroom and you're like, am I really safe in this situation? It's the same thing, right? You're practicing something that you're not really sure, nobody really knows, right? So, okay, so 40s, 50s, so this is, the 60s are the time of like the close calls and the domino theory, and Vietnam is heating up. By the 70s, things are gonna calm way down. This is what they call detente. Okay, so this is basically the like, they call it the like defrosting of the Cold War, right? So if you think of the 60s as like the coldest of the cold, things are gonna start to thaw out a bit in the 70s. And I think there's just a realization of like, we can't keep doing what we're doing because we're literally dealing with like the end of the world. And this isn't good for business. This isn't good for people. So what can we do about this? And so this is the era of men with massive eyebrows, just to like remember it that way. So here you have Leonid Brezhnev of the Soviet Union and Richard Nixon of the United States. And what makes them different is that they're starting to meet a bit more. Nixon actually goes to the Soviet Union, which is a huge shift, goes to China, is actually like traveling to these places to meet with them. And so there's more of an extension of like diplomacy. And same thing, And so they start to develop treaties that limit the number of missiles that you can even have. So rather than just trying to keep up and keep up and keep up, let's just limit it, here. Nobody gets more than this amount. And that keeps us balanced, but we still have power. And so that's kind of what the 70s look like. The 80s, everybody's eyebrows have calmed down a little bit. And then the 80s, what you get is some massive, In the 80s, you get like just everyone, there's even more of like calming down, right? And so there's some massive changes in the Soviet Union that really lead to the end of the end. You've got the Soviet Union was in Afghanistan, fighting in Afghanistan for the entire decade of the 80s. And it's super expensive, and they basically run out of money. They can't keep up with this arms race, because they don't have enough money to do it. So Gorbachev, he's on the right. He develops these new policies, one being glasnost, which is essentially like a way to open up the media a bit more to allow for the press to write about things that they weren't allowed to write about. And perestroika, which is restructuring the economy so that it's not so, state-run. and just general diplomacy with Reagan. And so that pretty much leads to the end of the Cold War, right? So, I mean, in this picture, you have the fall of the Berlin Wall, which the Berlin Wall went up basically overnight, and it fell basically overnight. And it's really the symbol of the end of the Cold War. This is 1989. It's 2 more years that it takes for the Soviet Union to really fall, to elect a president. And so, you know, this is the end of it. But I mean, I put a question mark because one of the things that I think is being debated right now, and you know, when you're studying history that's so close to the present, we don't have the same capacity to like really analyze what happened and why. And so we're only now, you know, 30 something years after the end of the Cold War. And in 50 years time, we might not look at 1989 as the end. You know, there's a lot of tension with the United States and Russia still. So did the Cold War end? Did it never end? Is it different? Does it just look different today? I think this is like a huge question that there's no way that we could know now. This is something that we'll know in years, decades from now. We'll be able to really pinpoint more of a shift. Maybe we're not in the same Cold War. Maybe we're in a different conflict that we're really not able to like identify. I don't know. But I think this is super interesting to like look at history as just sort of, you know, essentially like evolving just in terms of like, you know, like what counts. All right, so you've got the slides. There are like quick timelines at the end that I'm not going to go through, but that basically includes everything. And all right, let me go through and answer some questions. Okay, so if you haven't yet, go into the questions and upvote things so that I can pick and choose the ones that you really want me to answer. All right. History as in ongoing. Yeah, man, still going. Okay. All right, so I did that one, so I'm gonna delete that. Okay. What were the lasting effects of Stalin's rule that led into the Cold War era in Russia? So really you can see a lot of just like the strong arming that happens, right? So yeah, I mean, Lucas, shout out to you for answering this question. This is awesome. So you basically have changes in industry in Russia, changes in the way that information flowed in Russia, and both of these things are going to last beyond when Stalin dies. You know, I think like one of the things that's interesting is at like Yalta at the end of World War II, you have Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt. And even just by the end of the war, both Stalin or actually Stalin is alive for 10 more years, but Roosevelt dies by the end of the war. Stalin dies in the early 50s. And so a lot of how the war ends doesn't, you know, it's then kind of taken up by different people later. And so, you know, I think, let's see. Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest thing would just be that most of just like how the Soviet Union operated for the rest of the 20th century was really based on Stalin's ideals. You know, Lenin kind of put together a certain communist Russia, but Stalin then like takes it from something to a lot, to really intense. And so right after Stalin dies, there's actually a process of de-Stalinization, right? Where Khrushchev has to sort of pull back from some of those things because they're so harsh. And so then it just becomes, how do we create a Soviet Union that is not as harsh as it may have been under Stalin, but still upholds the same ideals of like the Bolshevik Revolution in a globalized world? Not easy, right? Okay, I'll go back to that. All right, how did the Cold War shape the 20th century? This is a super good question. You know, I think you would basically say that the Cold War completely shifted the entire second half of the 20th century. And actually, what's interesting is there's some data around this. the last 70 years or so since the fall of the Soviet Union, or since the end of World War II, have actually been one of the most peaceful times in history, which is a fascinating like piece of data, right? Because I don't think we think of this time in history as being peaceful, right? I mean, there's obvious conflicts that have happened in the last 70 years that are not peaceful. But because the superpowers had these nuclear weapons, they had to figure out how to coexist. And what you then get is, rather than, you know, in the first half of the 20th century, you get the superpowers fighting each other, right? That's World War I, World War II. After that, all the wars since then have been civil wars or some sort of proxy wars. And so you don't get the same level of violence, which is just kind of an interesting like look. And so I think it changed diplomacy. It changed just how we, you know, actually interact. And because we just, the technology just shifted it all. And it also put everyone sort of into two camps, with a third one sort of caught in the middle. I don't know. What would it have looked like without it? Not sure. Not sure if it could have been avoided. All right. All right, looks like those ones were answered. Okay, this question of like, what is the USSR? This is the Soviet Union. So it's Russia until the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. And then it's the Soviet Union until 1991 when it falls. And then it's Russia again. It's basically the same thing. All right, which side was imperialistic? Both. Everyone is imperialistic at this point because they are trying to spread their influence. All right, so this type of imperialism is a bit different than the like wave of imperialism at the end of the 19th century. You know, then was much more of, you know, colonizing to get resources. In this case, it's a lot more about colonizing to spread your influence. And I mean, before it was that too. It was, let's, you know, like help other countries. Let's, you know, share our goodwill. But in the Cold War era, it's a lot more like, let's make sure that this country is influenced by America before the Soviets get to them, or vice versa. And so, yeah, so the Vietnam War is a perfect example. You know, everything that happens in Vietnam is definitely done through an imperial lens, and other places as well, right? Guatemala. A lot of what happens in South America is incredibly imperialistic, right? I mean, I think like all the different like overthrow of dictators throughout in like Nicaragua and Guatemala, in Grenada, in Argentina and Chile, all of these overthrow of dictators are very much like, you know, backed by like CIA like coups essentially. And it's basically like, rather have, it's like picking between two evils is what the US sort of does. And so it's like, instead of allowing this like socialist dictator that's kind of close to communism come to power, instead we're gonna, you know, shift to this other guy who may not be the best guy, but he's better than this one, right? At least he's a friend of America. So if you read about just like what the United States involvement in South America in the last half a century, incredibly imperialistic. Okay. All right, I'm gonna pick a few more. Okay. This, like, why is Vietnam important to keep the rest of Asia from falling? I think it's just, it becomes the, like, the next one, right? So the Vietnam War actually begins in like 1954 as a civil war, right? So you have this civil war happening in it. So in 1954, the French are defeated. That would be the Vietnamese like colonizer. So they're defeated. They tried to hang on to their colony and they lost. as soon as the Vietnamese like push them out, then you immediately get this civil war, because Ho Chi Minh is the leader of northern Vietnam. He had studied in France, in Western societies, and he kind of comes back and he's just like, you know, let's do this a different way. And so he implements a more communist country in the north. And so then there's this like rush to defend the South, right? And so that goes on for like 10 years before the US really gets involved. They had been involved slowly, like Eisenhower put troops in Vietnam, JFK put more troops in Vietnam, and then Johnson, he's the one who like really puts a lot more because of false claims, but that's when it starts to ramp up. And so it's seen as this like gateway, right? And it's kind of geographic. It's like China, Korea, Vietnam. Like if it keeps going, now you have the rest of Southeast Asia just right here that could be taken over. And then it could just keep going from that. Let's see. Was the US fighting for not making humans extinct or capitalism? I mean, kind of both, right? I mean, I think part of it is that the US wants to make sure that there is no nuclear war, right? There's definitely like a push to make sure of that. But they also want to extend their like capitalist influence, right? I mean, I think like me personally, I don't think you can look at a lot of like 20th century United States history or decisions without seeing it through a lens of capitalism, seeing it through a lens of business, right? Like communist countries are not good business for capitalist countries because they can't market there, right? There is no like free market. And so you lose entire markets. And so I think part of the like push against that is to prevent the spread, right? And then eventually is to like topple it, but ultimately they're not trying to like topple it at first. Like containment is not about toppling, it's about containing. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna change this link. I'm actually gonna drop 2 links in the chat. So I've told you guys before, we are about to release our trivia mobile app. And we're actually gonna release it this Saturday. So we're gonna be sending out a couple emails this week. We're gonna do a totally free summit for all AP students that's not subject specific. And it's just gonna be like, okay, we're about 1 month away from when APs start. Let's talk about like how you should spend this last month. And so I've uploaded a trivia game about the Cold War to the app that you can go play right now. Woohoo! So the way that you can get to it, it's still in beta, and so this is gonna kind of seem like a lot of steps, but it's not. And so I'm gonna put both links here. Basically, when you click the links, if you have an iPhone, you will have to download this one app called Test Flight. That's where like all apps go in beta before they're released. And so you may have downloaded it before. If you don't have a phone, you can also play on the web, and it's app.fiveable.me. And so actually, let me just put, let me put the whole link there so you can just click it. App.fiveable.me. Okay, so what I did is I added a Cold War trivia game that you can play at any time in the next hour. It's up, it's live. And so once you download it, you should see it there. And it's based on this presentation. And so I'd love for you guys to go in and play. You know, downloading the apps is free. Going to the app.fiveable.me is free. And you can kind of bounce around. On either one, if you already have a Fiveable account, you're already a Plus member, you can just log in as your Plus account. If you don't, then you can just create an account and you can still access this like live stream and the live trivia game. So because we're going to be releasing the apps this weekend and then starting next week, we're going to put up a bunch of trivia games so that you can play all the time. Would love for you guys to test those out. helpful for us to just get some feedback. So whatever your feedback is, you can either hit me up and email me, or, you know, hit us up someplace on social media. Our email is just hi@fiveable.me, and you can just let us know, like, hey, Amanda, this app is super awesome. It made a lot of sense and it was great. It was super fun to play. Or like, I was confused, whatever you want to say. Once the app is public, it will still be free. Yep, so the app is free to download, and just like our streams, anytime we post a trivia game, you can play live for free. So same thing, like while we're live, it's always free. If you want a backlog of replays of games and streams, then that is $35, it's actually $30 right now to sign up for the whole year. And this will last you until the end of the school year. So, and keep in mind the like cram sessions. The cram sessions are definitely like a big push, big reason to get involved. All right, so like I told you also, if you're not yet a Fiveable Plus member and you would like to become a Fiveable Plus member, you can use the code AprilWorld. I'm going to put it in the chat, fiveable.me/plus, and this will give you $10 off. Okay, so you can sign up, you can become a Fiveable Plus member for $25. And so I want to stick around for a few minutes to just answer any questions as you guys are downloading the apps. If you're looking around them, if you have any questions about Fiveable Plus. If you don't have any questions, then, you know, thank you guys so much for coming. You know, like we're going to be live every Monday night. I hope you come next week. We're going to be talking about decolonization, and that's an important topic that you'll need to know. And we're going to just keep helping you out. There's tons of free stuff that we're doing. And if you like what you see and you want to support us and support our teachers and to help us be able to build more things for you, please consider becoming a member. You know, it's $25. It's just like the cost of a really good prep book. And from what we've heard from students, you know, it's like super helpful to have, and we're just going to keep improving it. I don't know. We're building an ed tech startup just for you and by you. We have lots of students that work for us, our interns that support us in writing trivia questions and just like giving us feedback. And so we want to build this out like students and teachers together, right? This is not like I don't know, just so you know, like where is the money going? It literally goes right back into building cool stuff for you so that we can make APs better, right? Like the cost of college is insane. Like I went to BU, I went to Boston University, and I just saw them just post that now it costs like $74,000 a year to go there, which is like, it was like 50 something when I was there, and that wasn't that long ago. It was like 10 years ago. I mean, I don't know where they think people will get this kind of money, but so, you know, $25 right now could save you thousands of dollars later. I'd say that's a pretty good deal. We'll send out some emails tonight with the links. But like I said, go in, download the apps, let me know how they are. If you find any issues, send them my way. If you have any suggestions, send them my way. All right, for anyone that's left, throw me an emoji in the chat of how you feel right now. However it is, however you feel, either an emoji or a word that describes how you feel in this moment right now. And my emoji would be, let's see, I'm gonna say a unicorn. I don't know, feeling like a unicorn. All right, we don't have too many, oh no, Megan. Stressed. I know, no, look at all these stressed out faces. All right, Irina, I see you, girl. All right, well, if you're feeling stressed out, do something that will, you know, calm you down. Think of something that is really helpful for you. Yeah, ice cream, you know, plan to like take a walk this week, or, you know, watch some like really stupid TV that's like really good but really bad at the same time. You know, like practice some self-care. That's the best thing I can say. And, you know, obviously study for your SAT, but the best thing you can do to get ready for it is to also just like calm down, you know? You've got this. You're more ready than you think you are. Just, you're your own worst enemy. Spring break is the week before APs. Yikes. Yes, sleep and rest. Sleep, get good night's sleeps. Make sure you're eating enough, you know, and like healthy things. Think of like, you know, think of all your like just needs and just take care of those needs. All right, I'm out. I'll see you guys next week is going to be back to Lassiter for decolonization, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks for global movements, where we'll talk about, you know, power to the people. So see you then. I'm out. Peace.